Matt Engel, founder and director of the Lone Star Project. Thank you so much and welcome back to Ion Politics.
Thanks, Jack. Happy to be here.
So let's get your take on President Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton on the second day of early voting over John Cornyn.
Well, I'm not surprised. I said over a year ago that I thought that John Cornyn was a dead senator walking because he's so out of touch with who now controls the Republican Party in Texas. It's a full-blown Trump MAGA party. I think that even if Trump hadn't endorsed, Cornyn was a dead duck, and this probably puts the lid on it. Now, it is extraordinary that less than 24 hours went by before Cornyn called Paxton albatross around Republicans' necks in Texas, and he's right about that.
And I know on Tuesday after the announcement that Democratic Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in the Senate said that the race got easier for Democrats than compared to several days before. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's right, but everything's relative. It's still hard. Winning a statewide race in Texas for Democrats is a knife fight uphill every day. But there's no question, though, that James Talarico has a chance to win this seat and to really bring responsible leadership to Texas. And it's been clear from what Republicans have said that Paxton is a problem. I mean, for goodness sake, Matt Shaheen said that he was unfit for office, that he was Democrats' best hope for turning Texas blue. And Jeff Leach called him out for cutting a sweetheart deal with a sex abuser. And so they're going to have to either eat those words or somehow rationalize them, because they can't suddenly change what are facts just because Donald Trump gave Ken Paxton a pat on the head.
And so, as far as the Talarico campaign, do you think that they are going to continue to use what Senator Cornyn and the other Republicans that you mentioned and use that and go on the attack against Paxton once this race gets going? And
well, I wouldn't call it an attack if you're using what Republicans said about Ken Paxton to inform the Texas public. That's not an attack. And that's just laying out facts. And again, I think it puts the Republicans in a box, because they've got to either stand by the words and stand by the fact that they have condemned Ken Paxton as an albatross around the Republicans' neck and unfit for office, or they've got to somehow say that they weren't telling the truth during the primary.
And Republicans are going to come right back at Talarico for some of his comments. What are you expecting? I mean, they're going to unleash, and is Talarico prepared for that, do you think?
I think he is. Nobody has any illusions. The Republicans will throw everything in the book at James Talarico. They're going to call him everything but a child of God. But the problem they're going to have is that most of what they're going to say, probably all of what they're going to say, is untrue, whereas the indictment of Ken Paxton is laid out chapter and verse, and a lot of it's been laid out by his Republican colleagues.
And so what do you think this race is going to come down to ultimately?
Oh, I think it's going to come down to whether or not the Texas public really wants to change, whether we want to see a government that's responsible and actually reflects Texas values. I mean, no Republican, not a Republican in Texas, not Greg Abbott, not Ken Paxton, not any of the others are talking about the fact that Texans are paying too much for their utilities. They're paying too much for gasoline. They're paying too much to keep their families housed. They've destroyed our Texas schools. Those are all things in which Democrats can now respond to the real needs of Texans, whereas Republicans are just reflecting a national Trump political point of view. They've abandoned their Texas brand. They've turned in their Texas card.
So let's talk about the Democratic primary runoff for the 33rd Congressional District in Dallas County, hotly contested, as you know, between Congresswoman Julie Johnson and former Congressman Colin Allred. How do you see this shaking out?
I think it's really, really close, Jack, and I can't predict a winner. I think it's going to come down to a lot of the mechanical parts of the campaign. Who's done the better job of identifying their support in the first round, and who does a better job of turning them out in the second round? My guess is that most of the supporters for the other candidates who didn't make the runoff probably won't participate. And so it's really whether or not Colin or Allred or Julie Johnson do the better job in taking their support from the first round and getting them to show up on the 26th.
So basically mobilization.
Yes, mobilization, nuts and bolts campaigning, old-fashioned grassroots stuff. I think that'll make the difference in that race.
And what we saw, I thought was very interesting this week, because we have Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who endorsed Colin Allred, was out there at an early voting site campaigning for him. And then we saw the other candidate, now the nominee for the Democrats in the Senate race, James Talarico, doing the same for Julie Johnson. Do you think that will have any impact on this race?
I think it'll have some, but most people have already made up their mind at that level, at the activist level. Again, I think it comes down to mechanics, and nobody should be surprised by that. I mean, Colin endorsed Jasmine in his Senate primary. It would make sense that Jasmine would endorse him, and of course, James, because he didn't get Colin's endorsement, and it was a pretty rough exchange, then it would make sense that he would endorse Julie. But I think, though, that Democrats will come together after that race. And the most important thing is whichever candidate wins it, because that's a relatively safe Democratic seat, that they do the hard work in the fall to turn out those voters and turn out those activists to help elect Democrats statewide and countywide in the fall.
Do you think that the either Allred or Johnson, one thing in this race is, who is more of a fighter? Do you think that is one of the factors in this race?
Absolutely. The problem is that they both have real record of being strong fighters and being very contentious and very capable counters to Republicans. And so I think that pretty much cancels each other out. That's why I always come back to, I think it's mechanically who's doing the best nuts and bolts job to turn out their supporters.
And then let's talk about the other statewide race that the Democrats have now. The main one is for Texas Attorney General between former mayor of Galveston, Joe Jaworski, and State Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas, who came very close to winning outright on March 3rd with 48%. Do you see this a similar instance now where Johnson will have a big lead over Jaworski?
I don't know if it'll be a big lead, but I expect him to win. I think he's in the driver's seat for a lot of reasons. They're both very, very capable, and they both will be really good counters to Chip Roy and MAGA Mays Middleton running on the Republican side because they're just going to be mouthpieces for Trump. But both Johnson and Jaworski are very capable attorneys who can represent Texas. But I think just the dynamics of the race favor Nathan Johnson. Dallas, Fort Worth area, he's better known in that media market than Joe Jaworski is in the Houston market. And I also think that that's a runoff in the congressional race. The runoff in Dallas will be a higher turnout than the runoff in Houston in the 18th congressional district.
And then let's finally talk about Lieutenant Governor. That's also a statewide race between the Democrats, State Representative Vicki Goodwin, and Union Leader Marcos Velez. Goodwin also had a substantial lead on March 3rd. She almost won outright with 48%. Do you see the same instance happening in this runoff?
Yeah, it's similar. Both very capable people, very qualified to be our nominee, but I think that the dynamics really favor Vicki Goodwin.
All right, we will leave it there. Matt Engel, founder and director of the Lone Star Project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.